She didn't hesitate, slipping his sandwich into his trembling hands as he sat shivering on the cold sidewalk. The next morning, a call came to her school that no one expected. A simple act of kindness had just set off a chain reaction, reaching all the way to the Pentagon. Welcome to XQ Incredible Stories. Let's uncover what really happened. It was one of those brutally cold November afternoons in Brooklyn, the kind that steals warmth even through the thickest coats. I was walking home from school, clutching my lunch bag tightly when I saw him sitting there. An old man, hunched against the brick wall of the corner store, his clothes ragged and thin against the biting wind. His silver beard looked like it hadn't seen a comb in years. His eyes were tired, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Most people hurried past without a glance, wrapped up in their own worlds, but something made me stop. I dug in my bag and pulled out the sandwich my mom had packed me. Without thinking twice, I walked over and gently placed it in his hands. "Here," I said softly. His fingers trembled as he accepted it. He didn't say anything, just looked up at me for a long moment, surprised maybe. Or maybe he just wasn't used to kindness. I smiled, then turned and kept walking, feeling a little lighter, like I'd done something important. What I didn't know was that simple act, giving him a sandwich, was the beginning of something much bigger than either of us could imagine. That man, Walter Grady, was invisible to most, but not to me. And the next morning, something extraordinary happened that would change both our lives forever. A call came to my school. The Pentagon had reached out, wanting to know more about Walter. Suddenly, the quiet man on the street was at the center of a story that stretched all the way to the highest ranks of our country's military. And it all started with a sandwich. Welcome to XQ Incredible Stories. Let's uncover what really happened. Walter Grady didn't say much when I handed him that sandwich. In fact, he rarely spoke to anyone. When I looked back once, I saw him sitting there quietly, peeling back the paper to take small bites, his eyes distant like he was carrying a heavy weight. I wondered what his story was, what had led him to this cold sidewalk corner, alone and hungry. The truth was, Walter wasn't just any homeless man, but no one walking by could have guessed that. The streets didn't care about his past. They only saw the weathered coat, the worn shoes, the silver beard tangled with dirt. Yet beneath those tired eyes was a man who had served his country for over 20 years, someone who had once worn the uniform of a proud Army staff sergeant. But life had taken a harsh turn for Walter after his wife, Margaret, passed away. The VA hospital had misdiagnosed her cancer, and the pain of losing her crushed him in ways no one could see. Instead of support, he met silence and paperwork, cold bureaucracy that never helped him heal. The grief swallowed him whole, and Walter disappeared into the city's shadows. Still, even on the streets, Walter carried himself with quiet dignity. He didn't beg or cause trouble. He collected bottles and cans just to survive. His military training had taught him self-reliance, and that pride stayed with him even when the world had turned its back. Back at school, I kept thinking about Walter. My mom noticed too, after I told her about him. "There's something different about that man," she said. "Like he's carrying a secret." Little did we know, that secret was about to unfold in ways no one expected. The very next day, something extraordinary happened. The Pentagon called my school, wanted to learn everything about Walter, the man I had given a sandwich to. And just like that, a simple act of kindness was about to shine a light on a forgotten hero. The morning after I gave Walter that sandwich, school was like any other day, buzzing with students rushing between classes, teachers preparing lessons, and the usual chatter filling the hallways. But then, the principal's office phone rang, and everything shifted. Our principal, Mrs. Daniels, answered the call with a curious look. After a few minutes of listening, her eyes widened, and she motioned for the secretary to come over. The voice on the other end was from an official at the Pentagon. Yes, the Pentagon, asking questions about Walter Grady, the homeless man I had helped. It felt surreal. How could a small act on a Brooklyn sidewalk suddenly reach the halls of one of the most powerful buildings in the country? Mrs. Daniels asked about the details, who Walter was, what had happened, and how I had met him. I told her everything I remembered, every moment of that cold afternoon, and how I'd given him my sandwich. The Pentagon official explained that Walter's military service record had surfaced after years of being lost in administrative errors. They wanted to make sure he was recognized, that his story wasn't buried beneath paperwork or forgotten on the streets. It was clear Walter had been overlooked for too long. Mrs. Daniels called a quick meeting with my teachers. They agreed to help, connecting with veteran support organizations and local charities. Everyone was determined to learn more about Walter and do what they could to support him. What began as a simple act of kindness was turning into a mission to uncover the truth behind a man who had given so much but received so little. Meanwhile, news of the Pentagon's involvement started to spread quietly around school. Some students were skeptical. "How do we know he really served?" they whispered. But for me, Walter was real. He wasn't just a story. He was a person who had touched my life in the briefest, yet most meaningful way. Little did any of us know, Walter's life was about to be pulled out of the shadows. And the next step would bring him face to face with a justice system that rarely noticed people like him. Walter Grady's life wasn't always lived on the streets. Behind the worn coat and tired eyes was a man who had spent over 20 years serving his country as an Army staff sergeant. His story began long before the cold Brooklyn sidewalks, in the heat of battle zones across Iraq and Afghanistan. Walter joined the military young, driven by a sense of duty and honor. He quickly distinguished himself through dedication and courage. Over the years, he served multiple tours, including 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. During these deployments, Walter's role was crucial. He managed logistics, ensuring supplies reached forward operating bases even under heavy fire. His bravery wasn't just in following orders. In 2003, his convoy was ambushed near Fallujah. Walter was driving a fuel truck when the attack began. Instead of fleeing, he risked his life to drive the burning vehicle away from wounded soldiers, preventing a deadly explosion. His actions saved 17 lives that day and earned him the Bronze Star for valor. But the most personal moment came when he carried a wounded medic 2 miles to safety through enemy fire. That medic was a young man named Michael Carmichael, a man Walter saved and who would later become a federal judge. Walter's military record was exemplary. Yet despite his service, his transition back to civilian life was anything but smooth. The loss of his beloved wife, Margaret, to cancer shattered him. The Veterans Affairs Hospital had misdiagnosed her illness, delaying treatment and leading to her death. Walter felt abandoned by the system he had served so faithfully. Unable to cope with his grief and untreated PTSD, Walter walked away from his benefits, his pension, and everything familiar. He vanished into the city's shadows, becoming invisible to most, but carrying the invisible scars of war and loss. No one on that cold Brooklyn street could have guessed the depth of his sacrifice. But soon, those shadows would begin to lift, sparked by a simple sandwich and a girl's kindness. Walter's life took a devastating turn after the death of his wife, Margaret. They had built a quiet life together after he left the military in 2004. Margaret was the center of his world, kind, strong, and his constant support through every challenge. But when she was diagnosed with cancer, everything changed. The pain was compounded by a cruel mistake. The Veterans Affairs Hospital, where Margaret sought treatment, misdiagnosed her condition early on. Precious time was lost, and by the time the cancer was correctly identified, it had progressed too far. Walter watched helplessly as the woman he loved slipped away. Her death shattered him completely. The grief swallowed his once steady heart. He spiraled into a darkness that even his military discipline couldn't pierce. Friends and family reached out, but Walter refused help. He felt lost, angry at a system that had failed his wife and betrayed his trust. In the months that followed, he sold their modest apartment. The money was donated to Margaret's favorite charity, a final tribute to her generosity. Then Walter disappeared. He vanished into the streets of New York City, choosing invisibility over confrontation. His pride, forged in decades of service, kept him from begging or panhandling. Instead, he collected bottles and cans, doing what he could to survive without burdening others. He slept in doorways, moved from spot to spot, careful not to cause trouble or draw attention. Despite the harshness of his new life, Walter never lost his quiet dignity. He clung to memories of better days, keeping a small, plastic-wrapped photo of Margaret close, whispering to it in the cold. "Almost there, Maggie. Just holding on a little longer." But the streets were unforgiving. Teenagers sometimes threw food at him for amusement. Shop owners sprayed water to keep him away. Even other homeless people kept their distance from the man who rarely spoke and sometimes woke screaming from nightmares. Walter's story was one of deep pain hidden beneath a calm exterior. A man who had given everything for his country and family, now left to survive alone. And yet, despite it all, he still held on. Walter Grady's days on the streets of Brooklyn were filled with quiet endurance. He moved silently from place to place, careful not to draw attention. To most, he was just another homeless man, a shadow among many, invisible to the bustling city around him. He avoided panhandling or causing any trouble. His military pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, Walter survived by collecting bottles and cans, trading them for small amounts of money to buy the bare necessities. On cold nights, when a wind bit through his ragged coat, he found shelter in doorways or beneath awnings, moving before anyone could complain. Neighbors rarely noticed him. The teenagers sometimes tossed scraps or jeered for fun. Shop owners hosed down sidewalks to keep him away, and police officers gently moved him along when complaints arose. Even other homeless people kept their distance from Walter, the quiet man who didn't join conversations or share stories. But behind that silence was a man carrying invisible scars. Walter had lived through combat zones, faced death more times than most could imagine, and had seen friends lost in the chaos. The horrors of war left wounds no bullet could inflict. The memories haunted his sleep, sometimes erupting into nightmares that made him wake screaming in the dark. Despite all this, Walter never lost his sense of self. His military training instilled a discipline and self-reliance that carried him through the darkest days. He refused to ask for help, refusing to be a burden. Yet, in rare moments of vulnerability, he would take out a plastic-wrapped photo of Margaret, his late wife, and whisper, "Almost there, Maggie. Just holding on a little longer." Life on the streets was harsh and lonely, but Walter's dignity remained intact. He carried the weight of his past with quiet strength, even when the world seemed determined to forget him. Unbeknownst to Walter, the simple act of kindness he received from a young girl, Emily, would soon change the course of his life. It was the first crack in the wall of invisibility surrounding him, the first step toward being seen again. The morning after Emily gave Walter the sandwich, things at school felt normal, at least on the surface. Students hurried to classes, teachers prepared lessons, and the usual hum of activity filled the halls. But behind the scenes, something extraordinary was unfolding. It started when the school's main office phone rang unexpectedly. Mrs. Daniels, the principal, answered with a polite "good morning," but her brow furrowed as she listened. The voice on the other end identified themselves as an official from the Pentagon. Yes, the Pentagon. They wanted to know more about Walter Grady, the homeless man a student had helped just the day before. The news spread quickly through the school's administration. Teachers exchanged puzzled looks, and a meeting was called to discuss how to respond. The Pentagon official explained that Walter's military service records had come to light after being lost in administrative errors for years. They wanted to verify details and ensure Walter received the recognition and benefits he deserved. Mrs. Daniels was moved. She called me into her office and asked me to recount everything I knew about Walter, how I met him, what I saw, and the simple kindness that connected us. I told her about the cold afternoon, the sandwich, and the look in Walter's eyes. It felt strange to be the center of something so big, but I wanted to help. The school quickly reached out to local veteran organizations and charities to learn more and offer support. Teachers began to speak with students about respect and empathy, using Walter's story as a powerful example. Meanwhile, whispers and questions floated through the hallways. Some students doubted Walter's story. "How do we know he really served?" they asked. But for me, it wasn't a question. I had seen the man, and I knew there was more to him than anyone realized. That call from the Pentagon was the first ripple in a wave that would carry Walter from the shadows of the streets into the light of justice and recognition. And the journey was only just beginning. The Pentagon official who called our school explained that Walter Grady's military service record had been missing for years. Somehow, due to an administrative error during a system update back in 2008, Walter's file had been lost, along with proof of his honorable service, medals, and pension benefits. This bureaucratic mistake left him invisible to the very system designed to support veterans like him. Walter's story wasn't unique. Thousands of veterans slipped through cracks caused by outdated technology, lost paperwork, or lack of follow-up. Many suffered in silence, unaware of the help waiting for them, or too proud or broken to ask. The Pentagon wanted to change that for Walter. They reached out to confirm his identity and gather as much information as possible. But with Walter living on the streets, disconnected from official channels, it was no easy task. That's when our school stepped in. Mrs. Daniels contacted veteran support organizations in Brooklyn, hoping to find allies who could help us piece together Walter's past. The community response was immediate and heartfelt. Local nonprofits, specializing in veterans affairs, began digging into their records. Social workers and volunteers visited Walter wherever they could find him, gently offering assistance. For the first time in years, someone was trying to reach him, not with suspicion or judgment, but with respect and understanding. Back at school, the story captured the attention of teachers and students alike. Classes discussed the sacrifices veterans make, the challenges of reintegration, and the importance of kindness to strangers. For me, it was strange to think that a single sandwich had brought so much attention to a man many had overlooked. It was a reminder that sometimes small acts can uncover big truths. But more than that, it was a call to action, a challenge to ensure that Walter and veterans like him would no longer be invisible or forgotten. And as this web of care and justice began to form around Walter, no one could predict just how far-reaching the impact of one young girl's kindness would become. As word spread about Walter's story and the Pentagon's involvement, a quiet movement began to take shape in Brooklyn. Veteran organizations, local charities, and community leaders joined forces to support a man who had given so much yet had been left behind. At school, Mrs. Daniels and my teachers encouraged students to learn more about veterans and the struggles many faced after service. Guest speakers were invited to share their experiences, and discussions about respect and empathy became a regular part of the curriculum. Walter's story was no longer just about one homeless man. It became a lesson in humanity. Local veterans groups began working to locate Walter. They combed through shelters, soup kitchens, and streets where he might be. Social workers approached him gently, offering food, medical help, and legal advice. Though Walter was hesitant at first, the kindness and persistence of these people slowly broke through his walls. Meanwhile, the media started to take notice. A small local news blog ran a piece about the Pentagon's call and the girl who had given a sandwich to a homeless veteran. The story quickly went viral, drawing attention to the millions of veterans who struggle quietly in America's cities. Donations began to pour in. People from all over sent money to help Walter and other veterans like him. Veteran housing programs received a surge in support, and lawmakers began to discuss how to prevent cases like Walter's from happening again. Back on the streets, Walter remained cautious. He had learned to survive on his own terms, wary of promises that might never materialize. But one afternoon, after receiving a warm meal and a clean set of clothes from a volunteer, he felt a flicker of hope, a chance that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't invisible anymore. Emily and I met again, this time in a community center filled with laughter and music. Walter smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in a long time. And as the sun set over Brooklyn, it felt like a new chapter was just beginning. Despite the growing support, Walter's reality on the streets remained harsh and unforgiving. Days without food were a grim truth he faced far too often. One particularly cold afternoon, after going 3 days without a proper meal, Walter found himself desperate. He ducked into Morelli's Corner Market, eyes scanning the shelf for something to ease the gnawing hunger in his stomach. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside, and for a fleeting moment, hope flickered in his chest. But the reality of his situation was brutal. Walter reached for a day-old loaf of bread, tucking it carefully under his coat. He hoped no one noticed. His hands trembled as he made his way to the exit. But Mr. Morelli had recently installed new security mirrors. "Hey, stop right there," the shopkeeper shouted, reaching for the phone. "I'm calling the cops." Walter didn't run. He stood still, the bread visible under his partially zipped jacket. "I just needed strength to live one more day," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Minutes later, 2 patrol officers arrived. The younger one, Officer Jenkins, noticed the dog tags around Walter's neck. "You really a vet?" he asked, skepticism lacing his tone. Walter nodded. "Used to be someone useful. Not anymore." At the precinct, Walter was processed like any other petty thief. A public defender briefly met with him, but seemed more focused on clearing cases quickly than understanding the man before her. Walter was assigned a court date for the following morning, a preliminary hearing where he'd be formally charged. Alone in the holding cell, Walter clutched a photo of Margaret, his late wife, and his dog tags. The weight of his past and present pressed heavily on him. He wondered if anyone would see the man beyond the charges, if anyone would recognize the sacrifices hidden beneath his tattered coat. And little did Walter know, the courtroom awaiting him was about to become the stage for a story no one could ignore. The next morning, Walter was escorted into Brooklyn's municipal courtroom. The cold, sterile room buzzed with the low murmur of lawyers, clerks, and a few spectators, mostly going through the motions of the day's routine. No family members were present to offer support. No character witnesses waited to vouch for him. Case number 47,293, State versus Walter Grady, the clerk announced in a dull monotone. Walter's worn shoes barely made a sound as he walked to the defendant's table. His clothes were wrinkled from a night in holding, his expression calm but resigned. The judge presiding was Honorable Michael Carmichael, a man known for his strictness and swift rulings. He glanced down at the case file, barely acknowledging Walter's presence. The young prosecutor stood and read the charges aloud: theft of a loaf of bread, prior petty thefts, and lack of a fixed address. The recommendation was for continued detention until trial. The courtroom, already familiar with cases like Walter's, seemed to dismiss it as another minor offense, a street-level crime with little consequence. A few snickers came from the back row when Walter quietly pleaded guilty. "I was hungry," he said softly. Judge Carmichael's gaze swept across the room, finally landing on Walter. There was something in the man's calm acceptance that made the judge pause. Slowly, he began reading the identification details. Walter Edward Grady, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. The words hung heavy in the room. Whispers began to ripple through the courtroom as the judge's expression changed. His hand clenched the edge of the bench, knuckles whitening. Without a word, Judge Carmichael abruptly stood, an unusual move during such hearings. The courtroom froze, confusion spreading like wildfire. "Court will take a 15-minute recess," the judge announced, voice rough and controlled. "The defendant will remain." As the courtroom emptied, Walter sat alone, eyes fixed on the floor, unaware of the storm his presence had just stirred. Judge Michael Carmichael stepped quietly into his chambers, the echoes of the courtroom still lingering in his mind. The name Walter Edward Grady had caught him off guard. There was something familiar, something personal that tugged at a memory buried deep beneath years of legal cases and courtroom formalities. He sat at his desk and pulled open a drawer, reaching for a worn photograph. The image showed a group of soldiers standing proudly in desert fatigues, faces grim but resolute under the harsh sun of Iraq. His own younger self was there, a medic among them. And in the back row stood Walter Grady, tall and steady, a figure he hadn't seen in 2 decades. Judge Carmichael pulled up his computer and accessed military records, a privilege granted through his work with Veteran Affairs. His fingers trembled slightly as he searched for Walter's service file. The documents that appeared told a story of courage and sacrifice. 3 tours of duty, 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, commendations including the Bronze Star for valor. Then came the mission report from July 2003. Walter had carried a wounded medic 2 miles to safety while under heavy enemy fire, despite shrapnel wounds to his own leg. The medic's name? Michael Carmichael. A sudden flood of memories rushed back. The burning convoy, the chaos of battle, the desperate struggle for survival. Walter had saved his life. Judge Carmichael sat back, a knot tightening in his throat. He had spent years searching for the man who pulled him from a brink. He had never known Walter's full name, only a shouted Grady amidst the din of combat. Now, here he was, sitting in his courtroom, a homeless man charged with theft. The weight of that reality settled heavily on the judge's shoulders. Justice wasn't just about laws and cases. It was about people. And this man, this hero, deserved to be seen. He rose, steadied himself, and prepared to return to the courtroom. Today's proceedings would be far from ordinary. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Judge Carmichael returned from his chambers. The usual rhythm of the proceedings had shattered into something new, something heavy with unspoken tension and curiosity. The judge took his seat, his eyes no longer distant but fixed on Walter. For the first time, the courtroom saw the man beyond the worn clothes and quiet demeanor, a decorated veteran, a hero with a story buried beneath years of hardship. The judge cleared his throat and began. Before we proceed, I have reviewed additional information regarding the defendant's military service. He recounted the details from the mission report, the convoy ambush in Fallujah, the burning fuel truck, and how Walter had driven away from wounded soldiers, saving 17 lives. The room fell silent. Then came the moment that stunned everyone. The judge shared how Walter had carried a wounded medic 2 miles to safety, a medic who would later become the very man presiding over the court. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The weight of Walter's sacrifice settled on every listener. The young prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, realizing the case had shifted beyond a simple theft. Walter looked up, meeting the judge's eyes for the first time with a flicker of recognition. It was as if the courtroom held its breath. The judge's voice softened. Mr. Grady, your service and sacrifice are not forgotten. Your case deserves a full and fair review, with respect to your history. The prosecutor rose, but hesitated. Your Honor, while the defendant's past is honorable, the charges remain. Before the hearing could continue, the judge called for a recess to gather more information. This wasn't just a case now, it was a reckoning. Outside the courtroom, the story began to spread. Reporters gathered, eager to uncover the full truth behind the homeless veteran who had saved a judge's life. Walter sat quietly, a man caught between his past heroism and present struggles. But for the first time in years, he was seen, truly seen. As the courtroom recessed, Judge Michael Carmichael retreated once more to his chambers. The weight of what he had just revealed to the court pressed heavily on his mind. He sat quietly, the stillness broken only by distant courthouse sounds. Memories from years ago flooded back. The chaos of that July day in 2003, the ambush near Fallujah, the burning convoy, and the pain in his leg. But above all, he remembered the man who carried him 2 miles to safety, who refused medical treatment until the judge was stable. Walter Grady had saved his life. The judge had spent years searching for that man, never knowing his full name or where to find him. Only Grady, shouted amidst the battle, had lingered in his memory. Now, the man was here, before him, a defendant charged with petty theft. Judge Carmichael's stern courtroom demeanor softened as he thought about Walter's journey, the hero who had become invisible, lost in grief and hardship. It was a harsh reminder of how those who serve can sometimes be forgotten. He reflected on his own path, from a medic on the battlefield to a federal judge. How Walter's sacrifice had given him a second chance at life and a purpose to serve justice in a new way. This wasn't just about the law anymore. It was personal. Walter deserved more than cold judgments and harsh sentences. He deserved recognition, compassion, and a chance to rebuild. The judge's resolve grew. He would use every tool at his disposal to ensure justice was done, not just for Walter, but for every veteran who had been overlooked and ignored. As the recess ended, Judge Carmichael squared his shoulders and returned to the courtroom with renewed purpose. Today's hearing would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one where a forgotten hero might finally find his place in the light. When court resumed, the atmosphere was tense but charged with a new sense of purpose. Judge Carmichael's presence carried a weight that everyone in the room could feel. This was no longer an ordinary case of theft. It was a matter of justice for a man whose sacrifices had been buried beneath years of hardship. The courtroom doors opened as Colonel James Mason entered, a distinguished veteran who had served alongside Walter during their tours in Iraq. Though years had passed, the military bearing and quiet authority of the colonel were unmistakable. He took the witness stand, his presence commanding immediate attention. After being sworn in, Colonel Mason addressed the court with clear precision. "I am Colonel James Mason, currently stationed at Fort Hamilton. I have known Staff Sergeant Walter Grady since our deployment in 2003. He detailed the harrowing convoy ambush near Fallujah, praising Walter's bravery in driving a burning fuel truck away from the wounded and saving 17 lives despite sustaining serious injuries himself." The courtroom hung on every word. Then, with measured solemnity, Mason recounted how Walter had carried a wounded medic, Michael Carmichael, 2 miles to safety while under fire. A hush settled over the gallery as the weight of those actions sank in. But Mason's testimony didn't stop there. He revealed a startling discovery. Walter's military pension and benefits had been erroneously terminated in 2008 due to a system migration error. For 15 years, Walter had been entitled to over $1,300 a month in unpaid benefits, totaling nearly $250,000. The judge's eyes reflected the gravity of this revelation. The courtroom was silent, the implications clear. A hero had been forgotten by the very system he served. Mason produced affidavits from fellow soldiers and a letter from General Richards, crediting Walter with saving his son during the ambush. Judge Carmichael turned to Walter, his voice steady. "Mr. Grady, you have served this country with honor and bravery. It is clear this court must act justly and swiftly." The stage was set for justice, long overdue, but finally within reach. The courtroom felt charged as the judge addressed Walter directly for the first time. "Mr. Grady, would you please approach the bench?" Walter rose slowly, the weight of years visible in his posture. He stepped forward, unsure what to expect. Judge Carmichael continued, "Normally, judicial ethics prevent me from presiding over cases involving personal connections. However, I did not recognize you yesterday. Now, after reviewing your file, I realize you are the man who saved my life in Iraq." A hush fell over the courtroom. Walter's eyes met the judge's, a flicker of recognition passing between them. Walter's voice was rough but steady. "I was just doing my job, sir." "You did far more than your job," the judge replied. "And this country has failed to do its job for you." The judge turned to the prosecutor. "Given these extraordinary circumstances, does the state wish to proceed with charges?" The young prosecutor stood, visibly moved. "Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Grady with prejudice." "So ordered," the judge responded immediately. Walter stood silently as the courtroom absorbed the verdict. Justice, delayed but not denied, had arrived. The judge addressed the court once more. "This court extends its deepest apologies for the miscarriage of justice that has extended far beyond these proceedings." Outside, the news spread quickly. Media outlets picked up the story of the homeless veteran whose bravery had been overlooked and whose charges were dropped in light of his service. The public response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from across the country, and veteran organizations stepped up to provide support. Walter was given a new chance, a chance to rebuild, to reclaim his dignity and the life he deserved. In private moments, Judge Carmichael shared his gratitude with Walter. "You carried me when I couldn't walk," he said quietly. "I became a judge because of you." Walter smiled for the first time in years. Not just something good, he replied. "Everything good." The story of Walter Grady became a symbol, a reminder that heroes don't always wear their medals visibly, but their deeds resonate forever. The moment the judge dismissed the charges against Walter, a wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Walter stood silently, absorbing the weight of the decision. After years of struggle, the man who had once carried others to safety was finally free, not just from the courtroom's judgment, but from the invisibility that had cloaked his life. As he stepped out of the courtroom, Walter was met with a mix of curiosity and respect. The news had spread quickly, and reporters crowded the courthouse steps, eager to hear the story of the veteran who had been forgotten by the system. Walter's public defender, who had seemed indifferent during the initial proceedings, now approached with a newfound commitment. He introduced Walter to Richard Harlow, a seasoned attorney from the Veterans Legal Defense Alliance, dedicated to protecting the rights of veterans. With Harlow's guidance, Walter began the process of reclaiming his benefits and accessing the support he desperately needed. Medical care for his service-related injuries, housing assistance, and financial aid slowly started to become realities. But beyond the paperwork and appointments, Walter experienced something more profound: recognition. For the first time in years, people saw him not as a homeless man or a defendant, but as a hero, a man who had sacrificed for his country and deserved dignity. Emily, the young girl who had given him that sandwich, stayed in touch. Their friendship grew quietly, a bridge between two worlds. Emily's simple act of kindness had sparked a chain reaction, leading to Walter's rediscovery. Community events honored Walter, and veterans groups rallied to share his story, using it to advocate for reforms in how the country treats its returning soldiers. Walter himself began to find a sense of purpose again. He started volunteering at shelters, speaking to fellow veterans about hope and resilience. Slowly, the shadows that had once swallowed him began to recede. Though his journey was far from over, Walter faced the future with a renewed spirit. He was no longer invisible. Walter's story soon caught the attention of the local media, and from there, it spread like wildfire. A small neighborhood news blog ran a heartfelt piece about the homeless veteran and the young girl whose simple act of kindness had triggered a cascade of events reaching the Pentagon. The article touched many hearts, shining a light on the struggles veterans face after service. Within days, larger news outlets picked up the story. Television crews arrived at the courthouse and community centers, cameras capturing Walter's quiet dignity and the growing support around him. Interviews with Emily and her family added a deeply personal touch, showing how a child's compassion could inspire change on a national scale. Social media exploded with discussions about Walter and veterans like him who had been forgotten by bureaucratic red tape. Hashtags calling for better veteran care trended nationwide. Stories poured in from people who shared their own experiences or those of loved ones, building a collective narrative demanding attention and reform. Veteran organizations seized the moment to advocate for improvements in benefits, mental health support, and housing assistance. Lawmakers cited Walter's case during sessions, pushing for legislation aimed at preventing such oversights in the future. Despite the sudden spotlight, Walter remained humble. He declined many interview requests, preferring to let his story speak for itself. His quiet strength resonated with many who saw in him both a symbol of sacrifice and resilience. Emily, too, found herself at the center of media interest, but she remained grounded, insisting her kindness was just a small gesture anyone could have made. "I just wanted to help," she said simply. Together, their story became a powerful reminder that compassion, no matter how small, can ripple outward and create change far beyond what anyone expects. As Walter's life slowly transformed, so did the conversation around veterans in America. The man once invisible on the streets had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of kindness and the need for justice. As Walter's story gained momentum, the local community rallied around him with an outpouring of support. Donations poured in from all over, money for housing, medical care, and daily necessities that Walter had long gone without. Veteran organizations coordinated efforts to provide long-term assistance, determined to ensure Walter would never be forgotten again. At community centers, volunteers organized fundraisers and awareness campaigns, highlighting Walter's journey and the broader struggles faced by homeless veterans. The message was clear: no one who served should be left behind. Walter himself was cautious but grateful. He accepted help quietly, still processing the whirlwind of attention and kindness that contrasted so sharply with his years of isolation. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope for a future where dignity and care weren't just words but lived realities. Emily and her family remained a steady presence in Walter's life. Their friendship blossomed into a meaningful connection, bridging generations and experiences. Emily continued to visit, often bringing simple comforts: a warm meal, a kind word, a reminder that Walter mattered. Local schools began incorporating Walter's story into lessons about service, sacrifice, and empathy. Students learned not just history, but the ongoing challenges veterans face, inspiring many to volunteer or advocate for change. Lawmakers took note as well. Walter's case was cited in debates about veterans' benefits and homelessness. New bills aimed at improving access to health care, streamlining benefits, and increasing affordable housing for veterans gained traction. Despite the progress, Walter's journey was far from over. Healing wounds from his past, both physical and emotional, required time, patience, and ongoing support. But with the community standing behind him, Walter faced each day with renewed strength. His story became more than a personal triumph. It became a catalyst for change, a reminder that when a community comes together, no one is truly invisible. Walter's life, once marked by silence and solitude, was now filled with voices of hope, justice, and belonging. Walter and Emily's bond grew stronger as time passed. What began as a simple act of kindness, a sandwich given on a cold afternoon, had blossomed into a genuine friendship bridging generations and life experiences. Emily often visited Walter at the community center where he was now spending more of his days. She listened intently as he shared stories, not just of hardship, but of courage, resilience, and hope. Walter's voice, once quiet and burdened, now carried the strength of a man reclaiming his life. For Walter, Emily was a reminder of the kindness that still existed in the world. Her youthful optimism and compassion rekindled something he had thought lost forever. They talked about dreams and struggles, about a world that could be kinder to those who had given so much. Emily's parents, initially unsure about the friendship, soon saw how much it meant to both of them. They joined community efforts to support Walter and other veterans, inspired by the connection that had changed all their lives. Their friendship wasn't without its challenges. Walter grappled with his past, the loss of his wife, the battles fought overseas, and the years lost to homelessness. But Emily's presence helped him face those memories with renewed courage. Together, they attended local events where Walter spoke about his service and the importance of remembering veterans beyond the battlefield. Emily proudly stood beside him, her presence a symbol of hope and the impact of compassion. Through their bond, Walter found purpose beyond survival. He began mentoring younger veterans and participating in community programs aimed at healing and rebuilding. For Emily, Walter's stories deepened her understanding of sacrifice and resilience. She carried those lessons into her daily life, inspiring her friends and family to look beyond appearances and embrace empathy. Their friendship became a living testament to the power of small acts, how a simple sandwich could open doors, heal wounds, and create lasting change. In a world often divided, Walter and Emily's connection was proof that kindness could build bridges stronger than any barrier. After years of uncertainty and hardship, Walter finally moved into Veterans Village, a supportive housing community in Brooklyn dedicated to helping veterans rebuild their lives. For the first time since his wife's death, Walter had a place to call home, a small apartment filled with light and warmth, a stark contrast to the cold streets he had endured for so long. The transition wasn't easy. Walter was accustomed to solitude and self-reliance, traits forged during his military service and years on the streets. But the community at Veterans Village was welcoming, filled with others who shared similar experiences and struggles. They understood the invisible wounds of war and loss. Walter's apartment was modest but personal. On one wall hung photographs, a wedding picture of him and Margaret, snapshots of his military unit in Iraq, and a new photo of him standing alongside Judge Carmichael at a recent Veterans Recognition ceremony. These images told a story of love, sacrifice, resilience, and redemption. Community staff helped Walter access medical care for his service-related injuries and mental health support to address the PTSD that had haunted him for years. Slowly, he began to heal, body and soul. Walter found comfort in routine. Morning coffee in the communal kitchen, afternoon walks in Prospect Park, and evenings spent reading or writing letters to old friends and family. The simple pleasures were profound after so much loss. Emily visited often, bringing warmth and friendship that helped Walter feel connected to the world beyond the village's walls. Their bond remained a source of strength for both. Walter also started volunteering at the community center, offering guidance and support to fellow veterans struggling with homelessness or reintegration. His quiet dignity and firsthand experience made him a trusted mentor. Though the road ahead was still long, Walter faced the future with a renewed spirit. He was no longer invisible. He was part of a community that saw him, valued him, and stood with him. His new home was more than a roof over his head. It was a symbol of hope, healing, and the power of second chances. Walter had come a long way from the streets of Brooklyn, but his journey was far from over. He realized that part of his healing lay in sharing his story, the highs and lows, the sacrifices, and the struggles that veterans face when they return home. Local schools invited Walter to speak to students about military service, resilience, and the challenges of reintegration. With Emily often by his side, he recounted his time in Iraq and Afghanistan, the bonds forged in combat, the horrors witnessed, and the courage required to face each day. Walter spoke candidly about the loss of his wife, the betrayal he felt from the system, and the years he spent invisible and alone. His honesty resonated deeply, touching the hearts of young listeners who rarely heard such raw truths. At community centers and veterans groups, Walter became a mentor. He offered guidance to those grappling with homelessness, PTSD, or feelings of isolation. His presence was a beacon of hope, proof that recovery was possible, even from the darkest places. Emily often helped organize events, ensuring that veterans like Walter had platforms to share their voices and experiences. Together, they championed awareness and compassion, breaking down the stigma surrounding mental health and homelessness. Walter's story also reached wider audiences through local media interviews and public speaking engagements. Each time he spoke, he emphasized the importance of kindness, the simple gestures that can change lives, just as Emily's sandwich had changed his. His message was clear: veterans are more than their service records or struggles. They are people with stories worth hearing, sacrifices worth honoring, and futures worth fighting for. For Walter, sharing his journey was a way to reclaim his identity beyond the hardships. It was a way to give back, to inspire, and to ensure that no one else would have to face what he did alone. Through his voice, Walter transformed from a forgotten man to a symbol of resilience and hope, a living testament to the power of healing and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Walter and Judge Michael Carmichael's relationship grew beyond the courtroom. Their shared history, forged in the fires of war, blossomed into a genuine friendship grounded in mutual respect and understanding. Occasionally, Walter joined the judge and his family for Sunday dinners. These gatherings, filled with laughter and warmth, offered Walter a glimpse into a world he had long been separated from. For Judge Carmichael, these moments were a reminder of the debt he owed to the man who had saved his life. During one such evening, the judge's young son asked Walter a question that struck deeply. "Were you angry about being homeless for so long?" Walter considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't need anyone's pity," he said quietly. "I just hope those who come after will remember those who came before." Their conversations often turned to the importance of remembering and honoring veterans, not just for their service, but for the lives they lead afterward. Together, they discussed ways to support veterans facing homelessness, PTSD, and bureaucratic hurdles. Judge Carmichael became a vocal advocate, leveraging his influence to push for reforms in veteran services and legal protections. Walter's story had opened the judge's eyes to the gaps in the system, gaps he was determined to help close. Their friendship symbolized the power of gratitude and the healing that comes from being seen and remembered. It was a testament to the bond forged in battle and strengthened by shared purpose. For Walter, having the judge as a friend was more than a personal connection. It was a sign that his sacrifices had not been forgotten, that the country he served was beginning to acknowledge its debt. Their bond inspired others, veterans, community members, and lawmakers alike, to come together in support of those who had given so much. In a world too often divided, Walter and Judge Carmichael's friendship stood as a beacon of hope, reminding everyone that true justice includes compassion, recognition, and lasting human connection. On Veterans Day, Walter stood tall at Fort Hamilton, dressed in his military uniform for the first time in decades. His medals, the Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and others, gleamed under the bright sunlight, each telling a story of courage and sacrifice. The crowd gathered in respectful silence as Walter stepped up to the podium. His voice, steady and strong, carried across the assembled veterans, recruits, and families. "I once protected this country," he began, "and now the country has protected me back." His words were simple but profound, carrying the weight of a lifetime of struggle and hope. Walter spoke of kindness, the power of small acts to change lives, the importance of never giving up on justice, even when it seems delayed. As he finished, the assembled military personnel rose in a silent salute. Walter returned the gesture, his eyes clear, dignified, and filled with quiet pride. Behind him, a new bronze plaque was unveiled outside the Brooklyn courthouse. The relief sculpture depicted Walter carrying the wounded medic, Judge Carmichael, with the American flag as a backdrop. The inscription read, "Justice is remembering those who were once forgotten." The plaque symbolized the community's acknowledgement of a man who had been invisible for too long, but whose story sparked change. Walter's journey had sparked national conversations about how veterans are treated, prompting legislative reforms to ensure no one else would fall through the cracks. He moved into Veterans Village, found a home, and rebuilt his life with dignity and purpose. His friendship with Judge Carmichael deepened, a bond forged in war and strengthened in peace. Walter's story inspired countless others, veterans, families, and everyday citizens, to act with empathy and courage. The essay of a 10-year-old boy who once saw Walter collecting bottles won a citywide award. Not everyone in torn clothes is bad. Some were memories instead. Walter smiled softly, knowing his past was no longer a burden but a legacy. His life was a testament to the truth that justice, though sometimes delayed, is never absent. No man left behind, not just a saying, but a promise fulfilled.